Fantastic. Hello, everybody. Okay, lots of other people are talking as well as just me. Hello, everybody. Hello, Tom. Little quiet hello, Mike, from Tom as he's whizzed past there. Everyone knows Tom, don't they? Give Tom a wave. Tom's asked the question at every single one of these events, which is a record I'm very proud of. Except one where you tried, you were like, me, and we had to wrap it up, so you missed. And another one where you just didn't. I'm talking shite, everybody. I'm talking absolute nonsense. Tom never asks a question. Shy sort. Got a PhD, though. Fantastic. So I'll stop picking on Tom. Okay. Welcome to Liverpool Skeptics in the Pub, everybody. The event this evening is put on by the Merseyside Skeptics Society, which you probably all know. We're a non-profit organisation for the promotion of scientific skepticism on Merseyside and various other places. We've got several flagship activities. One of them are these talks in here, which is on the third Thursday of every month. This month we're going to have a fantastic talk, I promise. Next month we've got a talk on homeopathy called Homeopathy, Is It Legal? By a guy called Peter Blanchard, who has discovered fantastically by digging through various bits of legislation that most homeopathy is in fact completely illegal, and he'll be telling you why next month. That's the third Thursday of January in here, so that's going to be fantastic. We also have regular social events which are on the first Thursday of every month, again in here, where you can just come along, and it's a bit smaller, a bit more intimate, but it's a lot more fun. Well, it depends who the speaker is, really. It'll be more fun than tonight. Just to big him up, that's all. And that's on the first Thursday every month. And we're kind of doing a fourth Thursday dinner, which isn't going to be happening this month, and you'll have to keep an eye on the website for that one. We'll see how that one goes. So we also do a podcast called Skeptics with a K, which you can find in iTunes, and we also do another podcast called Incredulous, which is never in iTunes because Andy never updates it. Yay! So you were, mate. You were. It's because you're the only one who listens to Incredulous. So without further ado, please welcome, on the topic of bad news and the role of PR in the modern media, massive round of applause please for our very own Michael Marshall.
Excellent, thank you. Thanks very much, everyone. So I'm going to be talking today about the media and just how much of a role public relations and press releases actually play in what makes the news. You might think this would be a talk of me spending an hour pointing and laughing at the Daily Mail, and there is a bit of that going on, but anyone who's been following things like the Leveson inquiry and the big splashes that have happened all over the front page Independent about PR firms like Bell Pottinger doing really, really dodgy stuff, they'll know that this is actually a bit more serious than just taking the piss out of the Daily Mail. So I want you all to treat this with, the respect and the maturity that the subject matter deserves. Jeremy Clarkson has the largest penis in show business. These aren't my words. They're not even the words of Jeremy Clarkson. These are the words of an article in The Sun of April last year. And the article was essentially saying that of all the men in British show business, Jeremy Clarkson is the most gifted in the trouser department. Apparently with a 10.25-inch penis. And if you're anything like me, when you see a story like this in the newspaper, you think, how did this become news? Why is this here? What was the journey that got us to this place where Jeremy Clarkson's penis is being discussed in not just The Sun, but other tabloids and other newspapers of the day? And I thought there's only a couple of ways that this could have come about. It could have been scientific. There could have been a lot of scientists sat around looking at photographs of Jeremy Clarkson and measuring his body proportions and his height to width ratio and the length of his legs or whatever, and figuring out through all sorts of equations and formula exactly what mathematically his penis size must be. But it wasn't that. It wasn't as scientific as that, unfortunately. You might think it was more of an evidence-based kind of thing, like some unlucky work experience kid came into the lab one day to find half the population of British television lined up along one wall with their trousers at their ankles and a tape measure in their hand. And it wasn't even as robust as that. It wasn't even as solid and reliable as that. How this story came to make the news, it made The Sun, it made some real newspapers as well, was they asked some women to guess. They gave a lot of women a list of about 20, 30 British celebrity names and asked them to just guess what size they thought their cock was. And then they ranked those, and that's how this became news. It's complete conjecture, it's based on nothing, it's speculation, completely baseless. And yet this still makes the newspapers as if this is a real news article. And as an aside to that, the interesting thing is, Jeremy Clarkson is a man. That's not interesting, but I'm going somewhere. If he's a man, he must therefore have a penis, presumably, and that must have some length. So there's an answer to this question. So if, for example, you were able to track Jeremy Clarkson down and wrestle him to the ground, pull down his trousers, and prevent yourself from scratching out your eyeballs long enough to look at his penis, you'd know whether he had a large or a small penis. But until there's that single act of observation, there is no way of knowing whether the contents of his underpants are large or small. It's essentially Schrodinger's cock, is what I'm saying. But the reason this did make the news, the whole thing was placed into the newspaper by a company by the name of F-Buddy, which is an online dating website. And if there's anyone naive in the audience, we'll pretend the F stands for friendly. And it was based on a poll that was commissioned and run through an online pollster company called OnePoll, who are something of a bête noire of mine and something of a minor obsession, which I'll be returning to later in the talk. So this is one example of the kind of nonsense that hits the news that makes you really start looking into this kind of thing. There's a couple of great examples here. There's a spate of news stories that hit all sorts of magazines, newspapers all across the world, all across the UK, from Time magazine all the way down to Nuts magazine. And it's about these really high-end luxury items. So you can see there's the world's most expensive yacht, which is a gold-plated yacht worth £3 billion, apparently. That's in the Sun. There's also the world's most expensive mobile phones, jewel-encrusted, made of solid gold. There's in Nuts there, it's the world's most expensive iPhone. And in the bottom right, most ludicrous of all, the £5 million iPad 2, which is made of solid gold and encrusted with T-Rex bones, apparently. The bones from a dinosaur. Now, these are in the news. This makes the news from Nuts magazine right up to Time magazine and across all of the newspapers. And it probably doesn't take a lot to suspect that this is probably bullshit. And when you actually look at this, it is bullshit. They're all made by a Liverpudlian guy called Stuart Hughes, who I peripherally know because he's a former client of mine. And the reason he's a former client of mine speaks a lot to what I'm about to mention. There's a very good reason he's a former client and not a current client, because there's actually no evidence that any of the products mentioned in those news articles, in those magazine articles, actually exist. There's a reasonable suspicion that none of them do. For example, you can see here the £3 billion yacht is actually a Photoshop of the yacht at the bottom there. So you can see that the same yacht, he's just Photoshopped it to make it look like it's made of gold. And this makes the Sun. Other images were stolen, so he put up the iPad 2 and the iPhone made of gold. Those were actually photos that allegedly were stolen from another website which sold... Hello. Okay, that's fine. We're all right. So another website which sold gold-coloured iPhones, and he just then sold them off as being like solid gold. And there was even a brilliant story which was in, I think it was a local paper, and a few other papers about a gold-plated BMX bike, which actually turned out to be spray-painted gold and not actually gold-plated. And yet, all of these made the news, and journalists published these stories uncritically. No media organisation delved into this and thought and looked at what was behind them. They just published these as if they're real. And it got me wondering, like, why would a media organisation publish a story which 10 minutes of Googling around and a little bit of thinking about would make you suspect this is just not true? And to get to the bottom of that question, you need to look at what journalism is today, because we probably still have quite an old-fashioned view of journalists. When you hear the word journalist, you probably think of a journalist in your head as being someone who's a dogged, determined, tenacious seeker of truth. They're out there to expose the bad guys, right the wrongs, tell the truth, and sort of talk about the world as it really is. You know, they're the type of people who have a network of sources all around the streets, and they source their own stories. You probably get an image of somebody in a Mac with a trilby and a press card tucked in it, licking a pencil as they write in a notepad. Or Lois Lane, that kind of journalist. And maybe that's what journalism used to be, but I think it's come a long way since then, and not necessarily for the better. Here's a good example. January 2010, we here at the Merseyside Skeptics Society ran a campaign called 1023, which was protesting the use of homeopathic medicines. We took overdoses of homeopathic medicines to prove that they were just sugar pills. And this is the number one story on the BBC News homepage for that day, was a report of our homeopathic overdose. And as you can see there's a quote from me saying something probably very wise, I imagine, I don't know. This was it in the BBC. Here's the same quote in The Independent, and the same quote in the Daily Mail. Now, I didn't speak to the BBC about this, and I didn't speak to the Independent. I definitely didn't speak to the Daily Mail. And it's actually to my eternal chagrin that they actually quoted me correctly, because the only thing worse than being misquoted by the Daily Mail is being quoted accurately. You know, they didn't have the good grace to misrepresent me. I'm entirely embarrassed. The only interview I actually gave about this whole thing was to the Press Association on the morning of the protest. It was about a 10-minute interview, just randomly got a phone call and I chatted to the lady at the Press Association. And that's the story that made the Daily Mail, the Independent, the BBC, and loads of other news sources. This made almost all the news sources. And the interesting thing about this for me is that prior to the overdose, I'd spent a fortnight trying to speak to the BBC. I'd spoken to the local news desk, to the science desk, to the nationals, to the radio, to the TV. Nobody bit. Not one journalist was interested in covering this at all. We didn't get any journalists down to the event in Liverpool when I spent a fortnight trying to pitch this to them. But I do a 10-minute interview with the Press Association, and the BBC run this story as their number one story for the day, their headline piece. And they didn't even bother phoning me to check if it was true. It was in the Press Association, and therefore it must be true. And there was actually an internal memo from the BBC I saw a couple of years ago, which literally said that in this age of online news and being and the importance of immediacy over accuracy, the BBC essentially said, if the Press Association publish it, consider it true, just publish it. You don't need to check it, don't need to fact check, just put it out there. It's on the newswire. It's absolutely ruling the media at the moment. Here's another more recent example. 123 million hours are lost to traffic jams every year. This is the story that's in the newspaper from December the 4th. This is the Press Association version. And it's essentially saying that British businesses lose out on 123 million hours per year due to their workers being stuck in traffic jams. As it turns out, as it transpires, this is just a press release by Churchill Insurance to get their name in the paper. Whether it's true or not doesn't matter. The whole thing is just to get Churchill in the paper. And it worked, because here is exactly the same article in the Express, word for word, not a single word changed compared to the Press Association copy, verbatim. And here it is again in the MSN News and the Yorkshire Evening Post, verbatim, and the Southern Daily Echo and the Belfast Telegraph, and 150 other news sources. If you do a Google search for the title, you come up with 15 pages of Google results, all with exactly the same text. Not a word changed in the Press Association. Once in the Press Association, it's out there in the world. Just covering what the Press Association is, it's one of the news agencies. And the news agencies are there essentially to set the news agenda. So you might notice that if you pick up a newspaper or pick up a couple of different newspapers on the same day, that they'll all tell the same stories, often in the same words. And it's not because all the owners of the newspapers sit down and decide what to tell the world that day. It's because they're all taking it from the same source, and that's the newswire, the news agencies. And essentially the job of a news agency is to have reporters all around the world actually there to source the stories, to write them up, and to put them on their own newswire, and then the newspapers pay quite a lot of money to get access to that newswire, to take that and turn them into stories of their own. So this is actually really good for the newspapers in a lot of ways, because if Robert Mugabe was giving a speech in Zimbabwe tomorrow, the Telegraph, the Times, the Express, they don't need to have someone in Zimbabwe. There's a press association, they'll cover it, you just pick off what they come up with. But the problem with that is, the Press Association and Newswire, they're not there to report truth, they're there to report accurately. And you might think it's a very subtle distinction, but it's quite important. Because if Mugabe was to say in a speech that I'm the single greatest president any African country's ever known, and I've done nothing but good for my people, a journalist would see that and then add context to tell its readers why that's bullshit, why Mugabe has done all these horrible things. But the Press Association and the news agencies, they're there to just report that he said this in this place, this many people turned up, here's the words he used. They're not there to do the delving. But that's fine, because journalists take the Press Association and then add their own interpretation to it, add their own context, add their own background. Or that's the idea. But as we've seen, the Press Association copy goes straight into newspapers untouched a lot of the time, so it's a real problem. You know, if it's great at disseminating truth, but if you put bullshit in, it flings that bullshit far and wide. And it's really dominant of the media completely. Just looking at a study in 2008 commissioned by Nick Davies at The Guardian and run through Cardiff University through Dr. Andrew Williams. It looked at the 5 top quality newspapers in the country. Well, sorry, it was the 4 top quality plus the Daily Mail. I don't know, maybe they just had a laugh and they included that, I'm not quite sure. But looking at all the stories in those papers over a fortnight period, 30% of all stories replicated news agency copy verbatim, word for word, not a single word changed. And a further 19% replicated large chunks of verbatim with their own sort of quotes, context here put in, but largely dependent on news agency copy. Which means every other story in the best newspapers in this land comes from a single source, or one of 2 single sources really across the news agendas. And the problem with that is, not only that it goes untouched by the journalists for fact-checking, for context and background, but also goes unattributed a lot of the time. So it's very rare you'll pick up a newspaper and it'll say this is from the Press Association. It'll make out like this is from the Independent. Or even worse, they'll put a journalist put their name at the top of it. So you think this is actually a story coming from the paper, and it's actually coming from the Press Association. If you ever see Daily Mail reporter at the heading of any article, that means Press Association or a press release from a company. It's as simple as that. And to look at why a journalist would print a story that they didn't write, that they didn't even check, but they put it out there under their own name. You've got to look back at the sort of the history of the news a little bit, because 20, 30 years ago, the kind of people who owned newspapers, they were newspaper men. They were Henry Fords and Citizen Kanes. They were the kind of people who wanted to own a newspaper not for profit, but for the cachet, for the kudos, to be the kind of person who owned a newspaper, to have that kind of power and influence in society, which in a way, it had its downfalls, but in a way it was fine because they weren't trying to make money. And then people like Robert Maxwell, people like Richard Desmond, people like Rupert Murdoch, who, as I point out, is part media mogul, part testicle. When they started buying up newspapers, they were businessmen, not newspapermen. And so they did what businessmen do, and that's look to try and trim down your expenses and maximize your profit. And I think for all the ideological control Rupert Murdoch has over the papers that he runs, and he has a hell of a lot of ideological control, I think it's actually his business sense that really fucks with UK media. Because if you're looking to cut costs at a newspaper, the first thing you do is look to lay off journalists and get the journalists you've got left writing more stories every day. Why have a guy sat in court all day reporting on the court cases that come up when you can sack that off and have your general reporter call the court at the end of the day and hear what happened? Why have a specialist science reporter when you can have a general reporter just reporting science press releases? So once you start cutting the number of journalists working for you, you increase the workload of the journalists you've got left, and that really eats into their time. And going back to the study from 2008, Cardiff University, they actually found that journalists today write 3 times as many stories per day as they did 20 years ago. All right, as they did 20 years ago. And once you start making journalists do more work per day, you cut in the amount of time they have to check facts, to source their own stories, because journalism really does run on time. That's the number one resource that journalists need, is time to check stuff. And I genuinely think that it's this time pressure and this pressure to write more per day, to get more from less. I think it's this that leads to the dark arts of poor journalism as we're seeing at the moment. Things like phone hacking, bin raking, paying the police for information, and also churnalism, which is this idea of taking some copy someone's given you and putting it straight out under your name without checking facts, without rewriting it, just pretending that it's yours. And the problem with taking away time for journalists to check facts in stories is that you leave newspapers really, really open for people to fuck with them, essentially. Here's 3 stories that appeared in the papers over the past couple of years that were completely fake. The top one was about a garter which had a microchip embedded in it, which would send a text message to the girl's boyfriend if she got sexually aroused without him there. And it was supposed to be there as a mechanism to see if your girlfriend's cheating on you. It's complete nonsense, obviously. It was put there by, it was written by a documentary filmmaker by the name of Chris Atkins, who essentially was trying to see how far he could get with a bullshit story into the press. And not only did he get it on the Daily Star, which you can see there, he got it into the bog standard tabloids, the Sun, the Mirror, things like that. He also got it on the Right Stuff, on Loose Women, and it also appeared on CNN News in America. Completely nonsense story, just made up just to play with the press. Here's another one, Sarah Harding from Girls Aloud. She's got a bit of a reputation apparently for not being the brightest spark, but apparently that's an unwarranted reputation because secretly she's a massive fan of astrophysics. Somebody was helping her move house, discovered this fact when she had a skylight in her bedroom and she had a telescope and she had a brief history of time and loads of books on astrophysics, and she's secretly really smart. Again, it's bullshit. It was just completely made up by Chris Atkins just to test whether anyone would check that, and it got published in The Sun. The thing that interests me about the Sun article here is this is published in the Sun's celebrity column, and I'd imagine that the editor of the celebrity column in a tabloid magazine isn't doing his job correctly if he doesn't have contact details for someone like Sarah Harding, someone like Girls Aloud, someone who represents this. If he isn't one phone call away from finding out their story is total bullshit, he's doing his job wrong. But that phone call never took place, because if you've got copy to fill for the day, you've got space to fill, why would you spike a story that would sell just because it might be false? And if you look into it, you can prove it's false. Why prove the story is false? Why not just let it go? So I think this is the kind of the problem we have with journalism today, is that because there's a real vacuum of people of time to write stories, there's also a vacuum of expertise. It means that journalism is very vulnerable to people who want to fill that vacuum with their own stories and their own agendas. And this is where press companies come in. This is where PR companies come in. Because if you're a journalist who's 10 minutes to deadline, you've still got a story to fill, and someone comes to you with 500 words of pre-written copy, you're going to be very tempted to take it, especially when you see the amount of pressure there is. I mean, here's a great excerpt from the Evening Standard on July 19th, which kind of demonstrates it, I think. And it says, the number of calls this office received yesterday from people who don't read the paper and don't know anything about it, but called just before the deadline, 7,298 phone calls. In one day, just before the deadline, from people trying to fill that gap in the newspaper with their story. So if you're a journalist who sat there with 2 more stories to file and you've got half an hour to do it, you can see why it'd be very tempting to take 500 words that someone hands you on a plate with a picture and a quote and either reword it into your own words or just put it out there with your name at the top. So just very quickly to touch on what PR actually is. Essentially, it's a bit like advertising, but a bit more subtle than that. It's a method of promoting a business, a person, an organisation, but in a way that doesn't feel like someone's being sold to. So it tries to be a bit subtle. It's very rarely made out that it's PR, whereas obviously an advert, you can tell an advert a mile away. PR tends to try and disguise itself as something else. Which makes it quite difficult to spot a lot of the time, especially PR done well is very, very subtle, which we'll come to shortly. Yeah. So here's one particular piece of PR that was in the newspaper in October, which I think is quite a nice story. The whole thing here is you can see this guy inside of a giant slipper. And this guy ordered a slipper from an online slipper company. He was a size 14.5 shoe. He missed the decimal point out when he was typing that in and actually got a size 1,450 shoe. 100 times bigger than he was meant to have. And you can see him there sat looking slightly bewildered in this giant slipper. It's bullshit, completely made up, complete bollocks. This is actually a press release and a publicity stunt done by Monster Slippers, who are a website that sells novelty slippers. And when you look at it, the amount of coverage they got, this made a lot of newspapers. And it probably didn't cost that much for them to do. If you think of how much it cost to knock up a giant slipper and take a photograph, they wouldn't have got the amount of press coverage had they bought advertising space with that money. But it turns out this whole thing, it was just put out there just to get Monster Slippers in the paper, and it's quite a fun image. It's just before Halloween. It came out October 20th, so a fortnight before Halloween, and it was just there to get the name of the company mentioned. One fun thing that came out, actually, when people were researching this to find out that it was actually just a stunt and a load of bullshit, was people looked up the head of marketing communications of Monster Slippers and found his Twitter account. And although he wasn't, this guy's called Tom Boddington. The guy who was the head of marketing and communications for Monster Slippers was called James something, but he had this guy's face. So it's almost certain that the guy who's head of marketing for Monster Slippers is the guy in the slipper here, and his Twitter account very quickly disappeared after that. Here's a slightly more recent story. This was from Tuesday, and it's saying here, I'll just read the headline, too racy, too lacy, 12 million pairs of Christmas knickers will never be worn. And the whole pitch of the article is that men buy 24 million pairs of knickers for their girlfriends at Christmas. Not one man, one girlfriend, that'd be weird, but across the country. But half of those are never worn because 21% are the wrong size, and most of them are gaudy and horrible and tacky because men are useless and crap, is essentially. What you're supposed to take from this article is that there are loads of knickers going spare. Men are essentially useless, and women look attractive in their knickers. This is the whole point of this article, essentially, and this was hell to research. I've got to point out, this was hell to research. But this isn't actual research. It sounds like it's some sort of sociological research. This is something we discovered, a quirk of the British nation. It's not actual research at all. What this is just a press release put out by a stain remover company called Dr. Beckman, who I've never heard of, but apparently they're a stain remover company. Here on their website, they've got a poll about lingerie being, is it really what we want this Christmas? This is on the website right now. And this is Brazen PR, which is a fantastic name for what they do, because they are fucking brazen, as we'll come to. And here they are talking on Tuesday about how this whole story, the knickers going spare, isn't real research. It's just a story they made up to get Dr. Beckman in the papers. And it's worked. Lots of people published it. Brazen PR, I've only recently discovered them, and I'm a bit irked about them because I think a lot of times PR companies will skirt the line between what's acceptable and what's probably a bit too far, and I think they cross that line sometimes. Here's a couple of examples from the news over the last year. The first one is saying that January 17th is the day that women in Britain feel at their fattest, and it's the day they're most likely to take drastic action about it. I would almost guarantee this will occur again, January 17th, 2012. This is from 2011. So does anyone mark that date in your diary? That's when you're going to feel bad about yourselves. So that came out at the start of the year, and here's another one from October 20th saying that people over the age of 45 can't bear to look in the mirror because of the effects of the ravages of time have made them impossible to look at, and how people, once they get past a certain age, is that the whole spin of the article is saying once you get past a certain age, you shouldn't look in the mirror because you're probably going to be horrible. And when you read the article, it's very much targeted at women as well, which I find a bit unnecessary. These both came out from the same company. These are adverts for the same company. That company is Transform Cosmetic Surgery Group. So you might wonder why a cosmetic surgery group would have an incentive to tell people that women are fat and horribly old, but we can do something about it. But if they ran with a story saying women are fat and horribly old, but we'll help you out, nobody would even look at that. You'd turn the page and think, what awful people. But because they run this as if this is some kind of scientific story, as if this is genuine research, as if this is something they've found out about the world, and they're just crowbarred into the third or fourth paragraph, people read this and it kind of sticks. It's the kind of thing that gets referred back to in magazines for years to come. These things never die. Here's another one just to prove that it's not just women who are the on the receiving end some fairly annoying sexist crap. Think he knows you, think again. How millions of men don't know their partner's dress size, date of birth, or even their eye colour. The whole point here, it says, millions of British males are astonishingly ignorant about their partner's basic characteristics, including clothes size and even eye colour. Their failure to pay attention can lead to awkward conversations and in extreme circumstances even cause a relationship to break down. So this is saying that men, you're shit at relationships and your girlfriend's about to leave you unless you know certain details about her. This whole piece was actually put in place, here it says here, according to a survey of 2,000 men buying scent for their female partner at the perfume shop. And we should have guessed that because there's some fairly big clues here. And so what the perfume shop are trying to say is, men, you're terrible, you know nothing about your girlfriend, she's about to leave you unless you know what her favourite perfume is. And you might wonder why the perfume shop would want to give that message to men. And you might want to specifically wonder why they'd want to give that message to men on February the 9th. So 5 days before Valentine's Day, they're putting the message out to men that your relationship is in peril if you don't know what perfume your girlfriend wears. And by the way, there's a perfume shop, yeah? I just think it's quite a nasty way to advertise yourself. So this is the problem. PR is absolutely everywhere. And it's very, very difficult to track, actually, as well. The problem is also, it's in the newswire as well. This is the problem, because 75% of news agency reporters admit that they use PR often. And this is the difficulty, because if people like, The Independent and The Express, as we've seen, as the Daily Mail, publish stories straight from the newswire without checking them. And the newswire is also vulnerable to these pressures, because the newswire are in the same box the newswire are in the same boat in a lot of ways as the newspapers. They've got the same pressures. They're trying to cut costs, employ less people, get them to do more work. So the news agency reporters have the same pressures to accept crap sometimes as journalists do. And I think it's a real problem, because once you add it all up, add everything up, you come to 60% of stories in the four main newspapers and the Daily Mail. They're wholly or largely from PR and Newswire, and then a further 20% have strong elements of PR and Newswire. So they might be led in the way that they report a story, they might have strong quotes, or they might be sort of giving the same kind of story, but in their own words. Which means, at best estimate, 4/5 of the UK press, what we consider to be our best and finest journalism, comes from either a newswire or a press agency, which I think is quite startling. Spotting PR is quite difficult by definition, because the best PR is sort of made to be completely invisible, or as invisible as possible. One example from, actually I knew someone who worked for a PR agency who was telling me about, I think it was a truck that went over on the motorway. It was a chemical truck, and it went over, and I think the chemicals caught fire, something like that. And it was one of his clients. So he got straight on the phone to the local press and said, I'll give you everything about the story, I'll give you more than you could ever find out, as long as you keep the name of the client out of the papers. And that's what happened. The whole story was reported, but the truck that went over was never actually reported from who it was by, which I think is quite interesting. There was also a story from Richard Peppiat when he was a couple of months ago. He told me that there was a major supermarket who, there was somebody who'd found a dead mouse in a packet of an own brand supermarket cereal. And this was going to be something that the Daily Star were going to run until it was pulled, because that supermarket bought a lot of advertising space in the paper at the last minute. and the story never got told. So it's that kind of PR you're never going to be able to spot. It's about what doesn't get published. But from what does get published, there are a couple of rules that you can use to spot it. Probably the most useful of which is the fourth paragraph law. And it's more of a rule of thumb, really, and it states that if a company name appears around about the fourth paragraph of an article, there's a very strong chance that company paid for the article to be there. And it's derived from logic, really. It's there for a good reason, basically. Is that back in the old days when newspapers were literally cut and pasted together with with paper and scissors and things like that. If you'd written a front page article, a major story, and then a bigger story happened, and your article got spiked to a side paragraph, then the editor would very quickly need to take off a lot of your story, take it away, cut it out. So what actually happened was people started writing, there's a convention journalism to write your news stories so that all of the most salient points at the very, very top. So if anything does need to be cut, it can be cut from the bottom where all the crap is, essentially. So the reason that a company name appears in the fourth paragraph is that it's high enough up to escape the cut, but low enough down to not be too obvious what it's about. So I want to go through a couple of different types of PR that you can spot in the media. The first of which is celebrity PR. I'm sure it's no surprise to anyone that a hell of a lot of what you see written about celebrities is placed there by their press agents. That's probably no surprise. Another thing I want to look at is the advertorial, which is the article that is actually an advert, but it kind of looks like a news article, but really it's just telling you to buy a product very, very openly. And then there's the non-event news stories, which is like the scientific formulas. The boffins find the formula for the perfect X. And there's also the shock surveys. So a shock survey reveals 10% of people do Y. So here's a celebrity story. This is Abby Titmus. I don't know if anyone knows Abby Titmus. I presume plenty of people do. But she used to be the lover of the disgraced former Blue Peter presenter John Leslie. And actually, the first time I gave this talk was in Glasgow. And I made the mistake of saying about John Leslie, who's a Scottish guy, I was going to say, well, right now I'd probably do some jokes about his rape allegations, but I can't do that because he's one of yours. And that didn't go down very well to a Glaswegian audience, oddly enough. Yeah, it was fine. But yeah, so the whole article here is saying that, is there nothing Abby Titmus won't do for publicity? Isn't she awful? Isn't she fame hungry? Isn't she publicity obsessed? Is there no depth she won't sink to? And I'll point out the advert at the top left has nothing to do with the main article, just in case there was any kind of confusion there. That's not the Daily Mail advocating anything here. So this appeared middle of October last year. It was a spate of articles that appeared all around that same time. So here's Abby Titmus exercising in public. And again, the whole spin of the article is, look at her, she's just doing it for the attention. Isn't this awful? Isn't this woman shameless? This is a tweet from her press agents around about the same time. She's thanked PHA Media for the fantastic coverage they've generated to promote her new show, Paradise Lost. She was in a play, and it appears, I think, in the title there, and in the first line of, around about the first couple of lines of that other article. Now, the thing that interests me about this is that it could well be that PHA Media, her press agents, went to the Daily Mail with photos of her and said, there you go, have at you, write what you like. And then the cynical, jaded journalists said, oh, this woman is awful, isn't she publicity hungry? It could be that. I strongly doubt it. What I strongly suspect is the case here is that her own PR agency went to the papers with the angle, isn't this woman desperate? Is there nothing she won't do for coverage? Because for some people, literally, I mean, it's not true for everyone, but for some people, there's no such thing as bad publicity. I mean, that's not always true, and it annoys me when people say it is true because, tell that to Gary Glitter, he's not selling very many records right now. There is such a thing as bad publicity, but for some people, there's a lot you can do to push that line. Looking at advertorials, this is one that caught my attention a few months ago. And it's about a homeopathic spray, so water then, which is a relief to henpecked husbands because it'll stop their wife nagging them. And then the whole tone of the article is saying that all these poor men are being nagged to death by their wives. They tried to keep it gender neutral, but they failed completely through. And the whole tone of the article is saying that these poor men are being nagged by their wives, but this homeopathic spray will set her mind at ease and she'll no longer nag you. And it's a boost to libido as well, apparently, which is great. So apparently all you need to do is spray into your wife's mouth twice a day and she'll be happy. Spray the homeopathic spray, I'll point out before anyone takes it the wrong way. And essentially it'll make your wife silent, servile and horny in about 8 weeks is what they're claiming, for £49 a bottle, which you might think is a bargain. So I wrote this whole thing up because I was a bit annoyed about this. Once you got to the very bottom of the article, all it was saying was, and you can buy this here from this website, here's the phone number, here's the price, and it was just advertising this to people as if this was a scientific finding, as if this was a breakthrough, and it's not, it's just an advert. It's snake oil. So I wrote this up and I called it the wife-taming wonder spray and pointed out how the journalist Nathan Rao, who's put his name to the top of this horribly sexist article, I point out that I think the journalist probably contributed barely a word to this article from the press. It probably came from a press release initially. And we actually got a comment on our website from Nathan Rao himself, who took exception to that, which is a bit of a problem. And he said, "Can you back up the fact that I didn't write this article?" And I thought, oh Christ, I got on the phone to Mike and I was thinking, I don't want to be done for libel. I can't afford to be sued for libel. I haven't got the patience, the persistence, or the pockets of Simon saying I can't afford to be done for libel. So I phoned up the makers of this wife-taming wonder spray and said, the article that was in the paper, how did that get there? And he said, oh, well, I just sent the journalist a press release. So he actually, the journalist, refused, was trying to call me out on this, but actually, the guy himself admitted this was a press release he'd sent off the paper, and the papers had basically published it with a journalist's name at the top. So I sent this back to the journalist, and I also pointed out that if he was claiming responsibility for this article, what he was claiming responsibility for was an article that was very sexist, had very horrible language in it, and also made an illegal claim about an unlicensed medicine in the first paragraph. And if he was the one who'd written that and was owning that, it was actually his illegal claim. And he hasn't been back in touch with us, so I think we're probably fine on that one. But there's loads of advertorials. I saw one in the Daily Mail, I think yesterday, or I think it was, for some dress that you can wear for 18 hours. And it was like it was a massive breakthrough. But I've been wearing these clothes for 18 hours. It's not fucking newsworthy. It was just saying, and you can buy this dress here. Absolute nonsense. The zany boffin formula. These are always fun. This one here is the formula for the perfect handshake. Firm squeeze and 3 shakes. The formula for the perfect handshake. And the whole premise of the story is that people get very nervous and worried when it comes to shaking hands with people. This was a survey was done, and this was a major concern for people, is how to shake hands best. And apparently everyone's always really nervous and tentative about it. So scientists, those wonderful scientists, have come up with the formula for exactly how to shake hands perfectly. And it's nonsense. This isn't a news article. This was a press release by Chevrolet. I know that because there it is on their website before it was in the Daily Mail. Large portions of this were replicated verbatim in the Daily Mail. This is their formula, which PH, perfect handshake, nice. It looks very complicated. The square root of E squared, that's meant to be V squared, blah, blah, blah. It looks really complicated until you figure out that most of the letters stand for stuff like eye contact should be somewhere between too much and too little. The hand should be somewhere between too moist and too dry. You should squeeze somewhere between too limp and too firm. And it's just really obvious stuff. It's a common sense thing, really. And apparently, this is a formula that was written by the University of Manchester. Psychologists at the University of Manchester came up with this wonderful research. And they did. It was a psychologist at the University of Manchester who came up with this formula. But it occurred to me that there was 3 ways that this story could have come about. Maybe the psychologist at University of Manchester was genuinely doing this research. Chevrolet found out about it and thought, right, this is perfect because our used car salesmen, people don't normally trust used car salesmen, but we can say if we've taught our used car salesmen how to shake hands perfectly, you'll trust them more and you'll feel much more relaxed, which was the angle that the whole story took. So maybe Chevrolet found out about this research and then incorporated it in their strategy. Or maybe Chevrolet gave a grant money to the University of Manchester and said, you do the research, we'll take the findings, but we'll pay for it all. Or maybe Chevrolet wrote every single word of this article ahead of time, then touted it around universities looking for a psychologist who would be willing to put his name to this for money. And you can probably guess which of those options Chevrolet went for. Because the University of Manchester isn't far from here. I know people who work at the University of Manchester. We tracked down the professor who came up with this. It was Geoffrey Beattie, who any Big Brother fans might remember from the first couple of series of Big Brother. He's usually the psychologist for hire. He's a very tanned guy with a slightly Irish accent. And we phoned him up. And he said, Chevrolet came to me with a full news article and says, we want a formula for the perfect handshake to go in this gap here to say that we know how to shake hands well. Could you come up with it? And he said, so I've scribbled in the back of a fag pack for 5 minutes, and it's probably about right. And there it is there. And this is how so many of these stories happen, time and time again, is that the company comes up, writes the whole thing themselves, then just finds someone willing to put their name to this. And Geoffrey Beattie's happy enough about this because he might have got paid for this. He certainly got on TV talking about this, and while he was there, he was able to talk about his own genuine research. So he gets his name in the paper, he gets the university's name in the paper, and he gets to talk about genuine research. So he's fine. Chevrolet are delighted about this because suddenly an advert for them saying our used car salesmen are really trustworthy becomes a scientific finding. It gets conferred with the legitimacy of science. And the fact that this is an advert for them gets hidden behind this veneer of legitimacy. But I think this is actually quite damaging to the reputation of science in a lot of ways, and especially when you see things like Jeffrey Beattie appearing in adverts essentially for Direct Line, for Kitchen Confessions, FreeSat, Nectar Cards, Boots, Nivea, and Nivea. He's essentially science for hire. You know, he's very reliably just the scientific go-to guy for a quote to make the advert seem like it's scientific research when really it's just a way of getting the word Nivea in the news. And he's not alone. There's plenty of other scientists who do it. There's plenty of other formulas who do it. So here's the formula for various other things, like the formula for the perfect way to ride a bike from Halford's National Cycle Week, and lots of other ones like this. And I think it's actually quite dangerous. It's quite damaging, I think, to the reputation of science in a lot of ways, because a lot of people will see, if you ever read the comments below one of these articles, and please never ever read the comments below one of these articles, they're always just not worth your time. But if you're forced to do this for research, you find a lot of people saying, why are we looking into the formula for the perfect handshake when we still haven't cured cancer? You know, why are they spending taxpayer money on looking into the formula for riding a bike when there are better things for that to go on? And people don't understand that there's no taxpayer money gone on this. Chevrolet have just winged a couple of quid over to a scientist to scribble on the back of a fag packet for 5 minutes. And I think it's quite damaging to the reputation of science, because every time you sell your name to a story like this, you sell a little bit of the reputation of science with you. And when people now think of scientists, too often they think of, you know, the zany scientist or the baffled scientist. That's the two most sort of popular media scientists, I think. And speaking of misrepresenting research, we'll move on to the surprising surveys, or the bullshit surveys. These are phenomenally popular. We'll all have seen them. It's the thing saying along the lines of, you know, shock research shows that 1 in 3 people do X, Y, Z. These are hugely popular. In the first week of August, from August 1st to the August 8th this year, 32 articles appeared in the Daily Mail alone based on this formula, just based on shock surveys. 32 in one paper. And the other thing is that they don't just appear in the news once, they appear in blogs, in commentary, in magazines, on talk shows, on phone-ins, and in all sorts of secondary places for secondary impact. These things never go away. In a couple of years' time, they'll be referred to again as research from 2011 found this. And that's fine if it's genuine research, but if it's a bullshit way of just getting a company's name in the paper, it kind of adds to this canon of nonsense, really. But they do almost always comply with the 4th paragraph rule. So here's a great example. Lipstick, cleavage, and a long hot bath. What women say makes them feel sexy. And this is an article in the Daily Mail from the 29th, is that 20th? 29th of July this year, and it lists all the things that women say makes them feel sexy, and later on the article also says that the findings of this survey say that women only feel sexy once a week, and that's 8 o'clock on a Saturday, I think it was. So if anyone's feeling sexy right now, you're wrong, you're abnormal. The average woman only feels sexy 8 o'clock on a Saturday. And it's got a list here of all the things that women do to make themselves feel sexy, like apply their favourite perfume, wear a smile, paint their nails, get their hair done, straighten their hair, get their cleavage on show, get their legs on show, wear a push-up bra, and lots of other really cosmetic things that I don't think necessarily portray a very good stereotype of people. And then we have this quote here from Sarah Wolverston, the spokesperson for Superdrug, which commissioned this research, saying, "This poll clearly indicates that while women know exactly what they have to do in order to feel sexy, they obviously aren't doing it enough. So you're all not trying hard enough, try harder, and by the way, Superdrug can sell you lipstick if you want it." You know, this is just, that's the whole point of this thing appearing in the news, but it comes under the veneer of actual research. It's not research, it's an advert. This one, that's not very interesting, we'll skip through that one. Here's another one in the Huffington Post, saying that women think about diets more often than they think about sex and relationships. This is from the Atkins diet. It's really obvious when you start looking into it. I think is it the 4th paragraph on this one? Let's see, 1, 2, 3. I think it might be the 4th or 5th, but yeah, they almost always go. Actually, no, it's the 1st paragraph on that one, so there you go. Here's another brilliant one. Sizzling sex secrets of our kitchen revealed. The average family kitchen is the setting for 384 arguments, 199 heart-to-hearts, 26,280 meals, and 7 sex romps, a study revealed yesterday. So the whole thing is, you know, your kitchen is sexy. This was a study by Siemens Home Appliances. Siemens Kitchen. Please don't make any connection between sex and Siemens. I think that's entirely unintentional and probably unfortunate. But, you know, there are these all over the place. The end of romance. 1 in 5 married couples kiss just once a week, and then it's just for 5 seconds. This was a study by the British Heart Foundation, which is a weird one, but it's for their Kiss for Life campaign. The Kiss of Life campaign, which was to teach children how to do the Kiss of Life. So they thought, oh, let's do a survey about kissing, and let's find out some fairly shocking results. And I think this is a bit disappointing. The British Heart Foundation are pretty decent, but I don't think they need to push a campaign which is fundamentally good by saying that marriages are loveless and unromantic. Because I actually took part in this poll, and I'll come to how I did that in a moment. And it literally asked, when was the last time you kissed your partner? And then it said, how long was that kiss for? Who the fuck remembers how long a kiss was for? How many times did you kiss your partner yesterday? Who knows that? Who remembers that? So, and then it takes this data and then spits that out as a finding, when actually what it's reporting is people's kind of inaccurate memories and lack of care in the survey. And I actually, when I did this talk at the Edinburgh Festival, and I came to this research, and I was saying that who knows how many times they've kissed, who remembers how often they kissed their partner? My girlfriend was sat in the second row and went, and got the biggest laugh of the night, which was really annoying. That one's boring. Yeah, we'll skip through those. This is a very good one. Britain's dirty bedrooms. Some people wash their sheets 3 times a year, no more than 3 times a year, and it's how we're all disgusting. Our beds are horrible. We're a state as a nation because we have all these dirty beds. Has anyone seen this one before? I did cover this one once before. All right, nobody. Does anyone want to guess who commissioned this research? Purcell. It's a nice idea, but it's wrong. Karen? You think a bed manufacturer? No. One more. Jackie Brown of Sheila's Wheels Home Insurance, which conducted the study, said, with many beds being used as an alternative to the kitchen table for a place to breakfast or snack, it's crucial that homeowners have accidental damage cover in the event of a major spillage. So your beds are dirty, so you better insure them, says Sheila's Wheels. Here's another great one. The metrosexual man is at risk of serious back injuries thanks to their man bags, and it went through all the things that men carry on a daily basis. The average man carries all of these things apparently, and it's equal to the weight of 12 bags of sugar. What was really interesting was when you looked at that, apparently the man bag is equal to 12 bags of sugar, but when you looked at that stat, the 12 bags of sugar was the weight of all of these things combined. Okay, you had to carry all of these to be carrying the heaviest bag, which the average man was carrying. And only 10% of people carried a gym bag. So it was essentially saying that the average man is a guy who is less than 10% of people was the average. It was really weird. You had to be at the very end of the scale to be the average man, but it's bullshit. And it was put there by the British Chiropractic Association, so that was a wonderful sort of meeting of nonsenses for me, really. And most of these came from a single company called OnePoll, who are just a persistent offender at this kind of polling bullshit. And I'm a little bit obsessed with OnePoll in a lot of ways, because the way they work is that, and they've said this themselves, is that they encourage clients to come to them with a finding that they want to find out already in place. So you decide what story you want to find out, and then you ask the questions that will get you that answer. You bias the questions around that answer, and then you poll what is essentially a fairly irrelevant and uninterested bunch of people to try and direct them in the direction of the answer you're looking for. And then apparently you data, it said this quite proudly, then you data mine what's there to see if there's anything else interesting in there. And anyone who's proudly saying data mine something doesn't know anything about statistics at all. If you're a user of OnePoll, you get paid 10 pence for every poll you take part in. And these are the polls that all of the last stories came from. You get paid 10 pence. But you can only get that 10 pence once you get to £40. You can only cash out at £40. This means you've got to take between 300 and 400 surveys before you get paid a single penny by OnePoll. And worse than that, if most studies only have 2,000 people involved, if you're in the middle of doing a 16-question poll and they reach their 2,000 number, you don't get paid anything. The poll closes right away, and you don't make any money for the time you spent on that poll. So there's a huge incentive for people to take as many surveys as they can and to complete them as fast as they can. Because why would you spend a long time doing something that you're not even going to get paid for, and when you do, it's only 10 pence? And I also think because you've got to get to £40 before you get any money from them, I think there's a lot of people who use OnePoll who'll never see a single penny from it, which is a really great thing for their business model, but not really ideal for their users. Because OnePoll get around about 3 articles per day into the news and sell those for around £3,000 a piece. So they make a lot of money from this. And the thing about OnePoll is they always have really dodgy questions. So I've sort of screen grabbed a couple. You probably can't read them very well. But question 1, do you think your dog has the ability to heal you with their love and affection? Yes or no? I mean, I think you can already see what headline they're going from there. And if you can see the headline they're going for from the question they're asking, there's no point in them asking the question, Here's another one. On the whole, who do you feel take the most sick days, men or women? So who phones in sick the most, men or women? You can't say neither. You can't say it depends on the man or woman. You have to choose man or woman to get your 10 pence. And there's other ones like, who do you believe more or think are genuine when they're phoning sick? So essentially, who are the biggest liars, men or women? And you can already see the direction these polls are going to head in from the questions they ask. This is a great example of that. Do you think possessing man skills, such as basic DIY, house and car maintenance skills, can make men more attractive to the opposite sex? Yes or no? That's basically a headline. If you just say yes to that, that's basically a headline right there. If 50% of people say yes, 1 in 2 people think it's important for men to know DIY to be attractive to a woman. There's a headline in the Daily Mail already. And whatever this happens to be for gets their way. And some of those are quite unoffensive in a lot of ways, but there are some that are quite terrible. And here's one that appeared August last year. And it didn't just make the Daily Mail, though I like to pick on the Daily Mail because it's a rag. It's a horrible right-wing rag. But the other papers, it appeared in The Guardian, it appeared on 5 Live a couple of times. It was on The Right Stuff for Loose Women. It was on local BBC News. It was all over the place. And it was saying that men are the best women because women are just too moody, and it's the women who admit it. This was a survey taken from one poll. And I know because I was part of that survey. Here's question number 1. Okay? Who do you prefer to work for, men or women? 50-50 choice. If you want to carry on and get your 10 pence, you have to choose one of these. You can't say it depends on the person. You can't say I don't care. You can't say it just really doesn't matter to me. You have to choose. So you're forced down an option. And then once you're forced down that option, you get another question. If you prefer to work for a man, why is this? Pick a reason. Is it because they're easier to deal with, easy to reason with? Are they more professional? Is it because they have no time of the month? Because they have less mood swings? Is it because they're more reasonable? And you want to pick none of those, but you want your 10 pence, and you want to do this quickly. So you just pick one. You just carry on through. You wipe yourself down and carry on through. You get to this question. If you prefer to work for a man, why do you think women make bad bosses? You never said women make bad bosses. You were forced to choose 50-50. But suddenly, the question is saying, you think women are bad bosses. It's changed the parameters, but you have to choose because you want your 10 pence. So you have to choose an option here. And the options are brilliant. Is it because they're hormonal, because they bitch all the time, because they're highly strung, or because they lie? They lie. But you want your 10 pence. You want to carry on. You've already got this far. Why would you stop now? Why would you give up? So you want to get your 10 pence, so you pick one of these options and feel slightly dirty about yourself. And this is what happens. A couple of days later in the Daily Mail, men are the best bosses, women at the top are too moody. They're hormonal, incapable of leaving their personal lives at home, and only too happy to talk about their staff behind their backs. They're a nightmare to work for, a survey concludes, and it's women who think so. They prefer men because they're straight talking, get to the point, actually makes them easier to deal with. They don't have hidden agendas, mood swings, or get involved in office politics. It's all of those things that appear in that list are just right there. And the story is just made from those 3 questions alone. You've got a story. And it's just because people are forced to choose these things to try and get some cash out of one poll in any kind of way, really. Here's another good one. Lock up your bridesmaids. Why a wedding is where a married man is most likely to stray. It's saying that something like 50% or 30% of married men have had an affair at a wedding in the past. This was a press release for Illicit Encounters, which is an extramarital dating website. Yeah, dating again there. And it was followed up in More magazine. There, 32% of men admit to cheating on their partner while at a wedding. I believe this photo was actually sent by Alice to her boyfriend Warren at Mike's wedding reception, which I think is a really lovely touch. I think that's really well done. And one poll actually have a really interesting reputation when it comes to these websites that allow married people to find other people to have sex with. Here's a couple of examples just from Illicit Encounters alone. Cheating Britons, 1 in 10 would have an affair if they could get away with it. So it's saying it's normal. You want to do that? It's normal. By the way, here's how you can do it. Bankers have more affairs, apparently. Women in healthcare have more affairs, presumably with the bankers, I'm not quite sure. I guess it's another case of NHS workers being fucked by the bankers. Yeah, political. Devon has the most love cheats. Well, someone has to. If you're polling a decent sample of people, someone has to be bottom, someone has to be top. It's just data mining again. This was in The Independent. Could an affair save your marriage? Probably not. Probably not. But Illicit Encounters would tell you otherwise. And men, the love cheat losers, they're twice as likely as women to be caught out when they've strayed. That was an interesting one because it wasn't saying that men cheat twice as much, but just that women are better at it, which was kind of covering both bases really nicely. And again, all this is just ways of saying if you want to have sex with somebody, you can do it on this website. And it's not just there. There's another one here. This is for lovinglinks.com. 1 in 5 women would forgive their man for a one-night stand as long as it meant nothing to them. That couldn't be more explicit in saying, men, come sleep around, it'd be grand. Having an extramarital affair is good for the health, so good for the health and the relationship. It's a blessing in disguise. So one poll really seemed obsessed with getting you laid, I think. But they also, as well as sex stuff, they do a lot of stuff which is sexist, and that kind of really annoys me, because I think if you're going to pitch a product, if you're going to sell a product, fine, do it, but do it ethically. You don't have to necessarily promote sort of archaic and nonsense stereotypes and offensive stereotypes about people. For example, 4 in 10 people are feuding with their family, with women blamed for starting the trouble. This was in the Daily Mail and lots of other places, and it was an advert for Family Guy. It's like, does Family Guy, when they're releasing a new DVD, do they have to tell us that women are the fault of major family arguments just to sell their DVD? And this last one's quite nasty. 1 in 10 women have tricked a man into getting them pregnant, with less than half actually wanting the person they used to stick around once the baby was born. This is from Bounty Parenting Club, which is a club set up to support young parents, and it's saying that the child probably isn't yours. Here it is in The Sun, and I think it's either The Sun or the Daily Record. It would do a word for word the same. And the language used, I think, is incredible to show just how there's so much kind of vitriol in this. 1 in 10 mums tricked, block capitals, their fella into getting them pregnant, a survey revealed yesterday. Top rusers were lying about being on the pill. A quarter of those said they duped their man, said he would have given in anyway. And the thing about this, I think, is quite damaging, is I spoke to Dr. Petra Boynton, who's a psychologist who specialises in sort of the psychology of sex and sexual relationships. And she's saying fears over paternity and fears over being trapped into a family are actually one of the major contributing factors to domestic violence. It's not something that turns a reasonable man to domestic violence, but it's something that can snap somebody who's already that type of person. It can really snap them over the edge. This is one of the things that they would cite as being a contributing factor. And do Bounty really want to promote that, just to say, we're the people you want to talk to if you're young parents, who need support? I don't think this sells their message at all. I think it's really ill thought out and quite damaging. And when Bounty were approached about this, they said, oh, it's just a bit of seasonal fun. It came out just around about the time of Halloween, and it was just a bit of seasonal fun. And I just don't think it's particularly fun, really. So I'll probably take you through some fairly naff stuff about the news. You probably go with a fairly jaded sense of the newspapers. But there are some positive signs. Journalism courses these days, universities are starting to teach students that they can't just rely on press releases and press association copying. They've got to do some actual fact-checking themselves, which I think is a really positive sign. Also, the internet and skepticism makes it really hard for PR companies to get away with it, and for companies' PR departments to get away with it, because all it takes is you to Google a quote you found in a news story and to track it back to the oldest place it appeared, and you almost always find the PR, like the actual PR agency or the company behind it. So it's really, really easy to track this stuff down. And there's even a website called journalism.com where you can put a press release in and it will show you every single newspaper that used that press release and what percentage they copied the text, which is really cool. There's other things like, if you ever see dodgy data in a survey, you can email the company for it, and they should, by all rights, give it to you, especially if they're part of the Marketing Research Society. If they are, and they don't give you the data, you can appeal to the MRS and have them sort of sanctioned by them and complained about, which can be quite useful. So there are ways to get around this, and also things like the BBC are starting to link to survey data that they've done, and I think that's got to be really encouraged, because if the data is there, it can be looked through and checked yourself. If a company won't provide the data, there's a good idea that something might be going on with it, really. So I've probably depressed you quite a bit, so I want to leave you with something a bit fun, a bit interactive. So, has anyone seen this story before? If you have, please don't spoil it for anyone. But heading off on holiday is an even bigger turn-on for women than sex. A trip away topped a poll to find the most exciting things in a woman's life, followed by becoming a mum. Romping with a loved one was third, followed by a pay rise. And what's the fifth most exciting thing in a woman's life? Okay, we've got we've got holiday, sex. Holiday, was it? Holiday, being a mum, sex, pay rise. What's number 5? Quick. Shoes, cuddly toy, nice, like it. It's not Jeremy Clarkson, I can tell you that much. Anyone else? You've seen this before, have you? Thanks for fucking that up, thank you very much. It's backing a winner on the horses is in 5th place. And we know this is true because horse racing promotion body Racing for Change carried out a survey of 4,000 housewives, and this is the answer they came up with. So if there's anyone here any women in the audience, this is the 5th most exciting thing you can do. If you're not backing winners on the horses right now, you should start it. Apparently it's great. So yes, that's everything. If anyone wants to find out more, you should read the book Flat Earth News by Nick Davies, which is really brilliant. There's the film Starsuckers by Chris Atkins and Bad Science, Ben Goldacre. And then I occasionally tweet this kind of crap as well. And that's it really, thanks.
Michael Marshall, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, at this point, I'm going to hand you over for your questions to Mr. Michael Marshall, who I have to remind the microphone's only very close to this microphone. And returning after about 15 months, our guest MC, I suppose, for the evening is Mr. Andy Wilson.
Okay, so it's Q&A time. If you'd like to give me an early show of hands if you'd like to ask a question. A couple down here, any at the back there? Okay, we'll start down here. I'll put you in a minute, Tom. Do you have your hand up? Yeah. Excellent. Okay, tell me your name. Hello? Hello.
John, right, I've got two questions kind of related. But if I'm rambling, tell me to stop. The first question is, with the Leveson inquiry, this is something we've been talking about amongst ourselves for a while, and what's occurred to me is that when you talk about the Leveson inquiry, everybody kind of assumes that these things have already happened. People kind of assume that burning of bells happened, kind of assume that the paparazzi chasing happened, etc. And nothing's really coming out, which is actually all that shocking. And I think the main issue is that people kind of knew this was happening, they kind of didn't care. Do you think that's a fair point, and if so, how do you make people care?
Yeah, I guess it's a fair point, but I guess in some ways it's almost like the paedophile scandal of the Catholic Church. Is that for years people have joked about priests mothering boys, but when it comes out you go, oh, they really were. Oh, Jesus Christ, I can't. I think people were still shocked that it was happening. I think they weren't necessarily shocked that it was happening to Hugh Grant and to Max Mosley, people like that. But I think when it came to Millie Dowler, I think that really genuinely shocked people, and I think also for Sarah Palin's. Anyway, for the people who were... exactly. So the people who weren't celebrities, who people don't who wouldn't necessarily who wouldn't think were fair game, people were the victims of crime. So it was, for people aren't as shocked as they should be. Because one of the people whose phones were hacked was a woman who was a rape victim, who was raped by an unspecified celebrity. And her phone was hacked, and the only way you got that phone number was if the police had been paid to give that phone number over to a journalist. And I think it's a shame because people aren't going to be too shocked when it's Hugh Grant and Steve Coogan who are the people sitting there saying my phone was hacked, because some people will just think, well, you guys are out there and it's fair game. But if there was more being made of the fact that it was rape victims who, for no fault of their own, who were a victim of a very serious crime and are now a victim of another serious crime, I think that would shock people. But so I don't know how you make people realise that hacking a phone is actually a really shitty thing and literally a crime. But I think it would really help if we could do that, yeah.
Okay, you have another point. Can I come back to you on the second point a little bit later? We'll also, if we go back to Leveson and stuff, general stuff later as well, stick to the PR stuff at the moment. Did you have a question?
Yes, I did, but I think I forgot it. I think I'm right now.
That was an affirmation, everybody.
Yeah, it was. The equation you threw up to say, what's happening, this, what was that? That's repeated every time over 5 years you see it on the news. I remember the original University of Manchester, it was Carey Cooper, psychologist, who came up with an equation in 2002.
So which equation is that?
The equation for... it was a handshake. There was that and the happiness one. That's always from the University of Manchester, and it gets dragged up every 5 years. But the first time I heard it was Carey Cooper was now moved to somewhere else, which is in 2002. And the happiness one was in 2004, which has been several times again. It's the same thing being dragged up. Do people have short memories?
Yeah, we do have short memories.
Mark, before you answer that, it's okay, I'll hold the mic. Sorry.
Yeah, people do have short memories. I mean, you can put a hand up for a question, seconds later you can't remember the question they want to ask. People have phenomenally short memories, and you evidence yourself. But I think it's not even that they have short memories, because I think once a story appears once, it's there as a reference point again and again and again. So it's not even that it's a case that people have forgotten, but it's an affirmation of something they already knew. And this is the problem when it comes to some of the survey stuff that goes in there, is that the first time it appears, you've got their fourth paragraph saying that this is actually a survey for illicit encounters for have sex with somebody else if you're married website. But when it appears in More magazine a couple of months later, it might not be quite prominent. And then years with time, some opinion piece in Independent says, oh, and research in 2011 proved this. And in a couple of years' time, it's built on. And there's this it adds to this kind of zeitgeist of nonsense. And the original sort of meaning of it, the reason this whole thing was invented and just came up with on the spot, kind of disappears. So it's not so much that they forget, but they treat the second story as as supporting it, as backing it up, as proving it even more. It becomes more sciencey because two scientists have said it now, when actually it's just two companies that made use of the same shitty tool. Yeah. Sometimes they're quite easy to track. So
what's the veracity of your story, Marsh?
Yeah, sometimes they're quite easy to track. So for example, the handshake formula from Chevrolet. You would track partly because they mentioned Chevrolet in the fourth paragraph. So you head over to Chevrolet's website to see their news releases, and 2 days before it appears in the newspaper, they put out a press release saying, "We've come up with this amazing new formula that shows this." So partly it's that. Sometimes one of the ones I showed earlier on was from it was Dr. Beckman, who's running it was a stain remover, and the whole story is about Christmas knickers and how men buy their girlfriend knickers. They mentioned the Dr. Beckman in the fourth paragraph, fifth paragraph, something like that. There's also a quote from a Dr. Beckman spokesperson. If you Google that quote, you come up with the earliest two references to that quote are on the Dr. Beckman website and are on Brazen PR website. So then you look around the Brazen PR website and you see that they've said, "Oh, recent stuff we've got in the news from our clients." And you find out on Twitter saying, 12 million pairs of Christmas knickers will never be worn. Our news coverage hits the press and makes a big splash. So it's really, you can, sometimes it's just a case of Googling around and using, playing with the date function on Google. You can track this stuff back. Sometimes other stuff you'll never conclusively prove that it was through a PR agency, because if they've cut the tracks reasonably well, if they're not. The good thing about OnePoll, and it's probably the reason I started on OnePoll in the first place, is because they were idiotic enough to publish every single press release they ever issued on their website. So as soon as it made the news, they published it and said, "Oh, here's the press release we sent off to the newspapers." So you could very easily just compare what they published first to the newspaper. It's probably why I think on OnePoll more than lots of the PR agencies, because other PR agencies are probably clever enough not to publish the thing to send out, so you don't undermine the fact that this was the news coverage you got. So yeah, you can pick off the more obvious and easy stuff quite easily. But the higher end stuff, this is why something I didn't cover in the Cardiff University research I brought at the start was they said this even applies to political journals. And the reason we didn't cover that too much is because it's really hard to track the political journalism stuff, because they tend to employ people like OnePoll, they employ people higher up the scale, people like JBT, Bell Pottinger, who've been all over the Independent, saying that they can essentially get David Cameron to do anything they want for their clients for the price of £1 million, essentially. They're making all sorts of claims, but they won't be stupid enough to publish their press releases. I didn't cover Bell Pottinger, but I was against it. Has anyone called this on the Independent over the last couple of days? Some phenomenal stuff. The truck example I brought up was actually Bell Pottinger, who are a number of those agencies that sort of skirt the line between what's ethical and smart and certain parts of what they do go right over the line. But I think it was some of the things that PR companies do are really interesting. These people who you'd never be able to track what they're doing specifically. But I did see there was one PR agency, for example, who were given £3 million by Colonel Goodacre in 2006 to be his official PR representative. So you can track those people. So yeah, it's hard to find, but you can only really find. I
think you mentioned journalism.com as well, didn't you, Marsh?
Yeah,
how does that work?
It's useful in some ways. It's useful if you've got a press release and you copy and paste the whole text into journalism.com. It will scan through thousands of news sources and cross-reference the press release you put into those news stories, and it'll tell you what percentage of the text matches. So you can find some articles are 100%.
So there's syndication there as well.
Yeah.
So the point that's being made is that, okay, you've got like 40 pages to fill, you fill it with this task. Does it really matter if that frees up difficult to obtain resources for concentrating on actual news stories?
If that was a dilemma we were faced with, then maybe there'd be an argument there. But I don't think that's what we're faced with. I think what we're faced with is a culture of journalism where people will put out what they can and then fill with what they have. I don't think that the journalists who publish 3 stories directly from press releases are then spending the rest of their day doing wonderful investigative pieces. I suspect that's not the case. I suspect there's a lot more pressures involved in filling things in lots of other places.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Okay, we have a question here.
Hi, I'm Dave Worrell, and I've got a question about the BBC, because I can kind of understand that tabloids, etc., have to pump up their circulations with nonsense in order to be attractive. What motivates the BBC churn out this rubbish? Why are they not setting a higher standard? But do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think by and large the standard of the BBC is higher, but it's not impeccable. I mean, I picked up the stuff earlier about the homeopathic overdose that we did and how the BBC didn't call me to clarify that and wouldn't accept my version of stories in the Press Association. I think the BBC are better than a lot of places, but they're not perfect. They probably should be better than they are, but of course they're under the same kind of pressures because everything's funded from the same pot, and there's constantly pressures on their pot of resources. They're putting staff left, right, and centre as well. It's the same kind of pressures. They're probably not feeling it quite as badly as the Daily Star, for example. I know when Rich Pepe was here, he pointed out that there was one Saturday where the Daily Star, the national newspaper, had him and one other journalist working on the whole paper all day. That's the amount of pressure to the Daily Star because Richard Desmond over at Channel 5 was pinching out pennies quite similar to doing. The BBC probably under with that same pressure, but they're still in the same field. And I think that the biggest pressure probably the BBC is that certainly for a long time they wanted to be the leading online news resource. And I think there was a lot of compromise on accuracy for immediacy at the BBC. I think it's possibly been addressed somewhat, but not perfectly. But it was better to be first and wrong than third and right for a while.
Okay. First question. We've got one down there. Any more at the centre of the room? Question here. Just do that one first and I'll move forward.
Hey, I'm Mike. When you watch the stuff on the Levinson inquiry, one more thing always goes through my head was why didn't they just make it up? Why they seem to like 3/4 of it they call it rubbish, and then they'll spend days and hours, shed loads of money to find out who a reality TV star starts.
That's a very good question. Why didn't they just lie rather than cheat? Maybe they have ethics. I'm not quite sure. I guess because it's hard to. Well, I suppose if you're making something up, then you're opening yourself up much more openly to lying. I guess if you're saying that. So if you said Max Mosley enjoyed incredibly sadomasochistic sex dressed as a Nazi, and you didn't know that was true.
Sorry, what's the problem with that?
Well, if you said that and you didn't have for a fact that it was true, you'd be in some fairly hot water with the libel lawyers. But if you back that up, even through information obtained in fairly dodgy means.
Illegally, you say.
Illegally, but I guess I know that. I don't know. There's been speculation that, for example, Andy Coulson wouldn't run a news a front page story unless he had a tape that proved it was true, because he was so scared of libel, because he was so committed to telling things, to not lying. I don't know why. That's a great question. I guess maybe there's a role to play from bravado as well. That they wanted to be first to get a scoop, and they'd rather a juicy scoop that they could prove even to their journalist mates that was true, rather than just making something up and looking a fool to their peers.
Okay, we've got quite a few questions coming forward now, so we'll start here.
When Murdoch broke the unions in the 80s, especially you then had a problem with journalists not really having the protections in place where they could say, no, I will not do such and such. So you had that protection taken away, and then with downsizing, you had the only people left in the newsroom to read the sociopaths on the people who were desperate for a job.
Yeah.
So how are you going to change that thing? Because
personally, that's
how do you win?
Yeah, I mean, so how do we fix the news? I guess you're asking, because I think you're right in that. And it's one of the things that when Rich Pepe, the former journalist at the Daily Star, was here a couple of months ago, he was pointing out that most of the people working for the Daily Star were freelancers. And freelancers who were very, quite inexperienced. He was only a couple of years out of uni when he was doing it, and very easily replaceable. At any given point, he was like, well, they're not going to do it, fine, we'll get someone else who will. And there's that kind of pressure there. I'm not sure how you fix it. I used to think that maybe things like citizen journalism would take over, but I think it was a woefully naive position to think that people doing it in their spare time would have the passion and the time to do this kind of thing, to uncover the kind of truths that the tabloids and the newspapers just weren't interested in because it didn't have the time or the resources to do that. I guess it's hard. I genuinely don't know. I don't know what would fix the news. I don't know what holds the kind of down spiral. And I think the interesting thing is, and I probably didn't make a point throughout the talk, but I don't know who I blame for this as such either, as part of the system, because it's hard to blame the journalists. Some people would say, oh, it's a journalist's fault because they're lazy, and I don't think it is because they're lazy, because they've got these time pressures on them. And people might say it's the PR company's fault because they're putting this shit out there, but that's their job. That's what a PR company is, and if people are going to take it, that's kind of the function of a PR company. And I don't even think it's Rupert Murdoch's fault. Well, some of it definitely is, but the general piece about the business and trimming down resources isn't necessarily his fault, because he's a businessman owning a business and he wants to maximise profits. I also make the analogy that it's like everybody's in the machine and they're turning their cog the right way, but the whole machine's going backwards. You know, everyone's doing their thing the way they should, but the whole system is just set up wrong. So I don't know who you blame.
Tories!
You can get the Tories if you like, that's not why not. Yeah, it's Tories, get the Tories, get the Labour going, we're fine. Yeah.
Okay, great. Next question. Connor.
Hang on, Connor.
Yes, Connor.
How predictable are the figures? Have you ever successfully spotted the story before it was published?
Yes, I have a couple of times. When was this? Occasionally I've taken part in a one-poll survey. I always tend to stick to one poll because it's quite reliable. And you can see the questions they're asking ahead of time. You can see what kind of thing they're going to come up with. And if you kind of throw out enough guesses, occasionally you get a few hits. It's kind of like fake cipher. It's like being a fake cipher, essentially. So I think it was last year I wrote two pieces for the MSS blog. One of which was about how men would rather split up with their girlfriends than see their football team lose in the FA Cup, which I think it was along those kind of lines. I'm not totally sure. That was kind of the gist. And I said that this will come up in the next 3 weeks and pick the newspapers and even pick the percentage of men that would give up their girlfriend. And I think I got most of the facts right. I think I was wrong on the date. But I said 33% of men would rather split up with their girlfriend than see the team knock out the cup. And it was 1 in 3 men in the middle who would rather. So I was quite happy with that one.
You should set yourself as a psychic.
I should set myself as a psychic. Okay, there's a lot of money in that. There's a lot of people who try and bring you down, so it's quite a dangerous world to be in, I guess. And I think the other one I took part in a survey which was talking about people's gossiping habits and how it asked the question, what day of the week do you gossip most? What does that mean? And like, what hour of the day do you gossip most? These ridiculous questions. So from that I kind of wrote an article saying that it's girls who gossip way more than men, and they do it this number of people gossip this amount of time, the picture numbers out there. And I got the timing of the article right, but I got the spin of it wrong, and they were saying, actually it's men who gossip more than girls. But ultimately, as I kind of pointed out in the talk, the details of the story don't matter. At any point, they don't matter. To a PR company, to the newspaper, and to the company who are being advertised. All that matters is that they get their name mentioned. It doesn't matter, or that church and insurance get their name mentioned. It doesn't matter whether 123 million hours are really being lost to traffic jams. Whether that's true or false is completely immaterial. And I think that's kind of the difficult thing, is that so often when people start looking at these bullshit stories, they start taking apart the spin of the article and saying, well, it's not true for all these reasons. It's not true for those reasons, but you're being distracted. It's not true because it was put there by a PR company to get the name in. Whether it's true or false doesn't matter, it's just a way of getting ahead. Yes, I've done it a couple of times.
Right, we've got room for one or two. I've got one, I've got another one back there. Anybody else back there? So just got to go, who goes to that? Okay, sorry. Okay, so 3 more questions, then we're done.
Hi, my
CDPs, yeah.
If this is just a downward spiral, what is going to stop it? We talk about how you talk about how we might fix it. Is the Levinson inquiry actually going to make any difference, or are we just going to carry on regardless with the same rule, the same nonsense, and the same PR all the time?
I don't think the Levinson inquiry will do anything to stop PR indicators. I think it will go the opposite way. As I pointed out earlier in the talk, I was saying that the time pressures on journalists and the amount of pressure to produce as much copy as you can in a short amount of time lends itself to sloppy journalism. And some of those sort of sloppy journalistic techniques are hacking forms, raking bins, paying the police, and others are journalism. I think if you cut off the first channel, you might see more people going on the second channel. So we might actually see that people are playing by the rules, that play by the rules of PR companies a lot more. So we might see it getting worse. At the same time, the way that we stop it getting worse is by making a big deal of the fact of stories that turn out to be bullshit, you know, by looking into stories, by questioning the facts that are in there, by making a song and dance when a company publishes something that's absolute nonsense. For example, the Bounty story about 1 in 10 women lie to their partners to get pregnant, and they trick and abuse in their lying evil hearts is essentially what was the line that a parenting company had to sell. Well, one of the things that was really affected there was Bounty as a website, the Bounty parenting company's website, is sponsored by all sorts of different companies. And so you can say to the companies who sponsor these people, this is the angle that they like, this is how they promote themselves. Do you want to be related to a company who would use such horrible language and such a horrible spin of a story to publicise itself? And if you hit people where the advertisers, they soon stop this kind of thing because the money is all that really. Yeah, I guess it is using PR to beat PR in a way. But, you know, it's shining the light on it. I think shining the light on it is the most important thing.
Cool, thanks Marsh. Okay, Dr. Tom Williams.
Yeah, I'm Tom, you already know who I am, thanks to Mike's very generous introduction. First off, Marsh, apologies for the football results of the weekend.
Yeah, fuck
off. My question is this: if an anonymous benefactor gave you a 6-figure sum to spend on PR, how would you use it?
Oh, bloody hell!
Well, foreign trips are going to be high on the agenda, right?
That's a very good question. Oh, what do I do with hundreds of thousands of pounds to spend on PR? I genuinely don't know what I do. It's a great question. I have no idea.
Surveys to say that a lot of people think that homeopathy is bullshit?
No, if you go down the route of commissioning a survey, you just contribute to a system that's already funded. I think that's part of the problem, is if you say, oh, well, I've got this money, so I'll now try and use the bullshit survey machines or bullshit formula for good. You're like Jeffrey Beaton, you know, who probably thinks he's doing all right. He's getting real science out there in the news, because when he lends his name to a scientific formula story and then gets on breakfast television to talk about his real research as well, he's like, well, people learn something. But at the same time, they've also traded off the legitimacy of science and contributed to, you know, the next time another company wants to get a story in the paper, they'll see that this worked and they'll do it again. They won't necessarily have the same altruistic ends as the good Professor Jeffrey Beatty would have. So it'd be really hard, I think. There is ethical PR out there. I mean, that's something I probably didn't touch on, is that not all PR is bullshit. There are good ways of disseminating information. There are plenty of plenty of companies that will put out press releases that are completely fine, that aren't predicated on bullshit stereotypes, that aren't promoting sectors and that aren't promoting nonsense and aren't there to try and get you lit. That would be doing it genuinely. But yeah, I don't know what I would promote as well.
Okay. Excellent question, Tom. Stumped the speaker. Awesome. Okay, we're going back to where we started. Nice to bracket the presentation.
I'm afraid this question is quite negative.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Is there anybody else?
I share the belief that this is going to continue. I think that we can do these sort of talks, I think that we can inform people, but I think that the actual thing itself will continue. So my question is, there is a need for truth. How will people get it?
I mean, there are still some decent journalists out there. You know, and I think that's part of the way that they'll get it. People like, we've had Brian Deere here, who was fantastic, as the guy who covered the fact that Andrew Wakefield faked the data that said MMR causes autism. And that was done through genuine investigative research, you know, genuinely brilliant investigative journalism. And that's because he was the tenacious, terrier-like seeker of truth who set basically his entire life on hold to do this. Similarly, Nick Davies at The Guardian, he's the one trawling all of the Levinson stuff along. I mean, this would have been buried for a second, a third time, a long time ago, if Nick Davies hadn't been still banging that drum. So there are still genuine journalists out there. I do think that citizen journalists, bloggers, will do plenty of work in exposing such stuff. It's just how you then make that popular, how you spread that wide enough. Because there is stuff that we see, I mean, it's probably still only the circles that we look at in the skeptical circles, but there are plenty of people who turned over things like the clinic in America right now, the Brzezinski clinic, who is publishing loads of really bullshit stuff about cancer research, and they're saying that they can cure cancer in this ridiculous way, and there are people spending a lot of money on that, and that's really sort of now coming to light of how bullshit that is, and people are getting informed about that, but they're probably doing it in a very small circle. So I guess the only thing we can really do is to carry on talking about it to a wider and wider set of people. I wish I had the golden bullet answer that said, right, this is how we fix the world, but unfortunately we just have to make the best of the system that we're in, really.
Well, £100,000 would be a good place to start. So thanks, Tom, for your kind donation. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Marshall!
Okay. Well, we're done. This is our last official event of 2011. So I'd like to say to everybody who's come along, everyone who's been in the past year, even though the ones who aren't here, okay. Thanks for coming along. Thanks for supporting us over the last year. I hope you all have a fantastic Christmas, which I appreciate the irony of an atheist standing here saying have a good Christmas. Okay, who cares? Have a good Christmas, have a fantastic New Year, and I hope we'll see you all again in January.
And come to QED.
What?
And come to QED.
QED's fantastic. We'll give our postcard later. But you put me completely off my flow now.
You're saying good night.
I was saying good night and goodbye to everybody. So I hope you all have a fantastic Christmas, hope you all have a good New Year, and hopefully we'll see you all again here in January. Once again, big round of applause please for our speaker, our very own Mr. Michael Marshall.
Who was that? Rob. You alright? Alright.